Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. We are so honored to be talking with IMCW's founding teacher and beloved friend, Tara Brach. When the opportunity to talk with you today came around, of course, it was like, well, we have so many questions. How are we going to possibly narrow it down to, an hour and 15 minutes? And so we've been kind of looking at some of the themes that are coming up in some of our classes, like kind of taking the temperature out there in the world. What's really alive for people right now that we might want to address. And I just came off teaching the IMCW New Year's retreat, which was really wonderful. And I also just taught this morning before this. So, I let my students this morning know that we were going to be together. And they're like, oh, ask her this, ask her that. So, trying to distill. And what really, there are themes, actually. There's kind of a common denominator to a lot of what folks are wanting to know and get your take on. And what, like, my distillation comes down to how we're in this, like, the shock has worn off in terms of the COVID disruptions and the upheaval in the world, in our country. I guess worn off isn't really the right word, but we've acclimated a little bit internally. And yet we're really tired. And it hasn't come back together again, right? So this dissolution has taken place and we've been in the stew for a while, but like no ground has come back underneath our feet. And so it's this sense of groundlessness and uncertainty, which of course is the whole of what we practice with and why we sit on this cushion regularly, so that we can cultivate this heart and mind that can handle what comes our way. But gosh, when the rubber hits the road and there's no groundlessness is a wonderful concept. And then reality hits and it's like, gosh, do we try to get back to a new normal? Do we try to get some ground under our feet? So I was just wondering, just, out of the gate, if you have any thoughts on that very small and easy question.
Yeah, just a pesky little thing going on here. Yeah, but I think you're naming it. There's a sense that uncertainty is the thing we most fight against. This brain is a predicting machine, and the survival brain just wants to kind of know what the threats are around the corner and prepare for them. And when we're not able to do much predicting, it's scary and it's exhausting, because anything other than relaxing into groundlessness really leaves us wiped out. And I think that we're all still kind of buzzing on the something wrong feeling, and we're waiting. There's kind of a sense of a collective waiting, that we're on hold.
Mm.
I don't know. I'm looking at all of you now, if you can relate to that sense of we're waiting for, yeah, life to come back to something familiar. And that right now is not real life.
Mm-hmm.
This is a pause for station identification, and there's no identification. But you're right, we're ground seeking creatures. And so what happens is there's other habits that then get triggered when we're in that anxious but not unsettled place. And often it's a lot of thinking and obsessive worry, and we create busyness, or else are really busy, but we get lost in it. We kind of speed up, we overconsume, we get more into conflict, there's more tension in relationships, and sometimes we just go on autopilot so we don't have to feel that angst. So in effect, we're waiting for life. And here's what's sad, Trisha, that this is what gets me, is these life moments, we don't know how many we have. It's like life is precious. And when we live as if we're waiting for something, we're missing out. We're not bringing our whole heart, our wholeheartedness to what's here. And there's here in the DC area this snow, which is of course an inconvenience and a horror for parents who are already struggling with everything about dealing with you know kids at home and so on. But there's also a beauty and a magic. It's been a beautiful snow, but we kind of somebody said it's our winter wonder advisory, but we miss the life that's here. There's a friend of you might know him, I'm not sure, but a friend of ours doing the teacher training, and his wife got diagnosed with terminal cancer over this period and with very little time left. And it turns out she had, through her adult years, she was an amazing packer. In other words, she could fit anything into whatever box they had. And they decided together that this is the box that life was giving them, just this amount of time. And they intended to fit every bit into it, every moment of loving and appreciating and gratitude, just not waste it. And I just think of how brave that is when we're just in these circumstances, and how do we really live this? And part of the challenge is that part of living this means that we have to really get in touch with what's painful and what's going on. Really facing a lot of losses. I'm aware, I don't know about you, but I haven't directly lost anyone to COVID. But during this period, I have several very dear people who are dying they're seriously ill and dying. And I have many, many friends who have lost friends. And so part of living the moment is just really opening to how it is. And I'll share one example that really inspired me about that. Was one man who, during the pandemic, and it's really hard to get sick with other things because of going into hospitals and stuff. And he had he wrote to me, he said he had very aggressive prostate cancer. So huge dread. He's a dad of young kids, he was 51 or something. Just a fear of losing everything he held dear. And he listened to a podcast where I shared my own experience being in a hospital and facing real deep uncertainty, and that the words that helped me were to meet our edge and soften, just to keep meeting our edge and softening. And that by doing that, we become that spacious presence that has room, that compassionate presence that has room. And so he just let that be his practice. And it brought him to a place of real curiosity and presence, of real loving presence. And then just a few weeks ago, his son was diagnosed with melanoma. This is a young boy. And so, it just really, So what they did, they revisited the book many of you know, Where the Wild Things Are. And if you remember, and this, his son, instead of walling off fear, took the guidance from that book, and here's a quote, which is, where you tame the wild things with this magic trick of staring into their yellow eyes without blinking. And that's what his son took on as his practice. And I'm sharing these things because adversity is really hard, uncertainty is really hard. And yet, if we are willing to deepen our attention, this is what grows us. We know this through the history of the species, that in all species, that those that in adversity adapt get stronger. So it's an invitation, an opportunity, and it's a really hard time.
Yeah, no, for sure. And, as you're talking about ways to work with uncertainty, skillful ways to work with uncertainty and groundlessness, the thought crosses my mind, what's the alternative? I mean, this is, sort of like often, people who have a serious disease or have, something terrible happens in their life and people say, oh, you're so strong. Often the response is, well, what's the alternative? It's like, it's not so much being strong as it is meeting life on its own terms as it's arising. And I think that, many people on this call probably have a practice of some kind. And that it feels like that's what we're cultivating in the practice. Otherwise, what are we doing this for? If not to learn how to meet those edges. And, we know the alternative leads to suffering for ourselves and others. And yet the letting go into groundlessness feels so edgy. It feels so uncomfortable. So yeah, it's this I don't know. It's a day to day for me anyway. It's moment to moment. What there is to meet keeps changing. And so I don't know if there can be some kind of relaxing into that flow. Yeah. I think that sometimes folks feel that if they relax into it, it's the same as accepting it. That accepting it, I should say, is the same as condoning it or saying, I don't care about that this is happening. I'm going to relax, or that somehow they're not doing their duty to, to stand up, or so there's so much nuance to it.
It's true. We definitely translate relaxing as either passivity that we shouldn't be doing, or else there's a sense that if we're not vigilant, something really bad will happen. So we're pretty reluctant to give up our obsessing minds. And, when you say, what's the alternative? That is totally true from an enlightened perspective. It's like we either are at war with reality, or we open to reality. And most of us have very subtle or not so subtle ways of going into trance as the alternative. So really, I think the invitation is, can we take an honest look at the ways we go into trance? Can we let that be part of the intention? That, oh, okay, so how am I distracting myself? How am I, what is it I'm unwilling to feel? What am I not willing to be with? But the other piece that's helped me is really getting what frees us. And, if each of you asked yourself the question, if you scan your life, just to identify 3 events that most shaped you. And if you don't have to do it right now or journal on it right now, but just to think about that. And, were they happy, joyful events? Or were they some great loss or failure? And I know for myself, I think about that and I think, well, I was very shaped by an event I've written about, being betrayed by a spiritual teacher. I was very shaped by, getting very sick for 5, 6 years and not thinking I was going to get well again. Those are things that force me to take refuge in a deeper way in truth and in love. So if we look at these times right now as just that these times are times that can really shape us. And I often think in a really kind of evolutionary way that, creatures have to adapt or else they don't pass their genes down. And right now, for the human species, our adaptation is a raising of consciousness. That's the only adaptation that can make a difference. We have to wake up our consciousness, which is what we're all doing. We have to directly wake up this capacity to sense our connection with each other, to love each other more fully, to collaborate, across the globe. I have no idea whether or not we'll make it or not as a species through what's going on, but I know the pathway is raising consciousness.
Yeah. It's it's a kind of good segue into another kind of thing that keeps arising is around just in my class this morning, someone asked the question around um, when people have really opposing views. So this can be really personal for us, like, and sometimes in our family, we've just come out of the holiday season, and I'm sure that many of you were gathered with people with conflicting views, and how to distinguish. Someone said, and so the question in my class this morning was, well, how do I maintain my integrity around my views? So he had views about gun control, and I can't let go of those views, because we were talking about like loosening our views. He's like, I can't, that's like a deeply held conviction that my practice has helped me to come to. So how do I be with someone who thinks the opposite of me? And so we had a discussion, and this is one of the things I said, I'll ask Tara about that, just around, because my take was like, well, gosh, we have to talk to each other. We have to be willing to be open to understanding someone else's conditions that lead them to where they are, or we won't survive. We can't survive this kind of divisiveness when we take a stand and are unwilling to be changed in the heart, if not in the mind, by what someone else is saying to us, or we have to care. That was the thing. It was like, oh, we can't just give lip service to saying, you know, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, or what's most meaningful for you about your conviction around guns or something. You know, we have to be willing to understand and not come with an agenda. And that's where I think people feel like, oh, then I'm giving up then my flag is not planted anymore. And then am I like going to be in this current where I can be swept away by things I don't believe in? There's a fear around letting go of our convictions enough to meet the other person in the middle, in the heart space middle, at least. So yes.
Well,
I will share the recording of this. Whatever.
Part of the problem with strong views is that we end up hating or disliking or thinking bad things about those that disagree, and that creates separation. And so I've had many, many people say, well, I've got, you know, this person who's close into me who, you know, voted this way and I'm voting this way, or this person is anti-vax and I'm, you know, or whatever. And I can't let go of my judgment of them. So it's not only I can't let go of my view, it's like I can't let go of my aversion towards them. And one guy said, you know, his brother and him had a major split after Trump became president, and they couldn't talk to each other. I mean, it was really, these are two brothers, and this is very common. This is not an uncommon story. And finally, you know, about a year ago, he told me, he said, I just want to love my brother. And so we explored, you know, what would make that possible for him to have, and as he explored it, and this is what's important, I think when we get caught in aversive judgment towards others for having different beliefs than us, we need to make what I call the U-turn and come back and say, okay, what's going on in that aversion in me? What's happening? And for him, the aversion was this fear that what his brother's beliefs in would translate to huge violence and suffering. And then when he kept on digging, you know, okay, so that's what's there in their fear about violence and suffering. And under the fear was that he cared about our world and he cared about life. And so if he could, from that place of caring about life, then re-examine, you know, okay, what can I do? How can I be on the planet? It becomes so clear, Trisha, from that place that hatred only breeds more hatred. And for so many of us, we're angry or hateful towards others because they're angry and hateful. And so it became really important to him, because he's a dedicated practitioner. Okay, this is it. It's like, it's fine to have the discerning wisdom that sees that another person's views can cause harm. We're not saying to lose that, but there's a real difference between discerning wisdom and aversive judgment. And this is the difference we really need to learn, each of us, by making that U-turn. And for him, what it did was he got clearer on what he cared about. He just as much saw the dangers in the views, but then he saw his brother as having views that were harmful, but not as badness. It's like there's a difference between a person with harmful views and a bad person. And he could then see again the goodness that he loved in them. And it makes me think of another friend of mine who lives in a college town that is surrounded by a rural area. The college town's more liberal, but the rural area isn't. And she has many, many neighbors who are anti-mask, anti-vax, and she's immunocompromised, and it's really affected. Even when things are lighter out there, she can't circulate. So she's felt a lot of anger and rage, kind of being imprisoned, the effect of other people's views. And she has neighbors who have very different views, but over time she's gotten to know, and she described one neighbor completely opposite end of the spectrum in terms of beliefs and politics. And this guy raised 4 beautiful kids. He's the most generous guy in the world. Anybody that needs help, he absolutely drops his life to step in and help them. She can't not see his goodness. So she said to me, Tara, I can't close my heart to him. And what I think is powerful about that, Trisha, is that there's a way in which waking up means we open to this paradox where we keep our heart open to the essential value and goodness in beings, and at the same time have the discerning wisdom to see how fear or ignorance or whatever can create so much suffering. And we have to be able to have hearts that are big enough for both.
Yeah. And the key piece that I heard you say, that, because I was thinking along with you in my own life, that lightened it for me was around the person with the judgment getting in touch with what was really true for them, which was their deep care and concern. And so that if that's the place that we can live from, instead of, the judgments may come and go, but that if we can stay in touch with that kind of deepest aspiration and the why of why we hold the beliefs we do, it might soften us enough to see that other people have that same heart. It could be the common ground that we make the connection through.
It's the necessary common ground.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually I think of what you just said as that's the next step. That's the hope. And Brian Stevenson, who's one of my my heroes in this world, he uses the word proximate. That we live in our kind of cocoons, our siloed groups, and most of us have very minimal contact with people that are very, very different from us. And as it gets more extreme, it's really demonizing others. I mean, I have never lived in a time where people from different parties really consider people from the other party as less moral or ethical, And so he basically says you have to get proximate. You have to actually get to know other people, to do just what you said, see that there are always going to be common places of caring. And when you can get that, then you have a place to build from. It's like Desmond Tutu, who another, just bless him. And he's been such an amazing guide for so many. He says, if you want peace, don't talk to your friends, talk to your enemies.
Mm-hmm.
We need to do it. And it's a stretch, but we have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, that does definitely feel like like the next step. And for me, it's felt like, well, we did try the other way. We got exhausted by it, and we see what the fruits of that have come to. We just look at, January 6th, and we can see the fruits of this conflict, and not just in political views or anything, but we see the fruits of things arising in our larger culture, in our ecology, and the environment, and all of these, social justice issues and things. It's come to bear, right? Like, we can really see it very clearly now. It's not an abstraction anymore. What doing it the other way does, that's, sort of like along the lines of what's the alternative. So now it's like getting into that zone of having to be more proximate or relational with people. And I think that people who have a practice, who meditate, certainly not just in the Buddhist tradition, but anyone with a deep contemplative practice that has compassion and interconnectedness as its base, that's such a gift to have those tools to fall back on or to rest in when you're tired. Not that we have to keep fighting, but just to kind of rest in that practice so that we can move forward. Because we've got, there's a big conversation going on in probably the world, but definitely the United States. I'd say in the last few years, even, around whether our practice is directly linked. Is the Dharma linked to democracy? Or is the Dharma linked to social justice? Or what does the Dharma have to do with, global climate change? Like, is it worth it to bring these things into our practice, or is that getting political, or that's not what the Buddha meant? Or do you know what I mean? It's a hot topic right now. And so, yeah, any thoughts on I'm sure you have some thoughts on that, but
I'm passionate on it, actually. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine a spiritual path that separates out our inner work of waking up our hearts and minds for how we walk on this earth and in this world. It's kind of unfathomable. And I feel like it's been so beautifully modeled, that the togetherness of inner and outer, by whether it's Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. or Desmond Tutu, that it's been so beautifully modeled that the love we're waking up inside gets expressed. And if you think of it this way, if you were at war with yourself, a Dharma person would say, well, you need to learn to, see what's going on and embrace your inner life. And if you're at war with your partner, then you see what's going on between you, and you bring that listening to the relationship. And why wouldn't it naturally extend to the wider society when we see the different ways that in our wider society that people are either being violated or denied their rights due to their sexual orientation or gender identity or their race or religion? Doesn't the Dharma guide us out of compassion to engage as best we can with that reality too? I mean, it's part of reality. So, when I examine the pushback, because I get it every time I talk about the suffering of racism or the suffering of non-human animals, or any of these areas. There are people that will email me saying, I was coming to touch some calm and peace, and you're bringing up divisive issues. And I think there's a real misunderstanding that spiritual practice is about calming ourselves down. It certainly has that capacity,
right,
but not by avoiding reality. It's really by opening our entire heart and being bravely to reality.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it kind of strikes me that in many religions, there's or spiritual paths, there are teachings on turn the other cheek or live without preferences. You know, there are teachings that can be used to spiritually bypass. And but there's also always teachings about the compassion teachings and the you know, treat everyone like you want to be treated. Like those are they can seem to be kind of opposite, and yet it's kind of how we are applying them, and that the fallback has to be the heart practice, has to be like the liberative quality. Like, how do you feel when you know, totally ignore a whole segment of society or nature or whatever? Where does that lead to? So, you know, it's such an interesting conversation. I love to hear, you know, folks from the whole spectrum kind of talk about this, because I think we all learn
Yeah.
about how the Dharma actually is. It's inextricably linked to everything we do. So, yeah, and especially when we're talking about the suffering of others,
That's right.
human or non-human or planetary. So, yeah, yeah, you know, so we're going to get to questions in a minute, but just one last theme that seems to be out there a lot is the relationship to faith or trust or hope. They can be sometimes used interchangeably, sometimes not, in the Buddhist tradition, because we don't, it's coming out now more as a topic. I think Sharon Salzberg has a book even coming out about it, about faith. But it seems to me like there has to be a trust in something unseen. If we're only relying on our, you know, senses and these brains to figure it out, I don't know what's going to happen. Seems like there is an element of faith that we might just call trust in the practice or trust in the order of things. But I don't know if that plays a role in your own, how that unfolds in your own life in working with these practices.
Yeah, yeah, and I love this inquiry. You know, what can we trust, or what can we have faith in, and what does it really mean to hope? You know, I just feel like these are actually very alive right now, because so many people are feeling so discouraged, and I do want to name that it's hard. I mean, it's hard to face what's going on to this earth and know how deep the danger is, or yeah, face the degree of suffering. And you know, I'm just so aware that unprocessed fear means violence and more suffering, and it's rampant right now. So it's hard to know all that, and to say, well, what can I have faith in? What can I trust?
Mm-hmm.
And my mantra now, almost, I would call it a mantra, the reminder I most use for myself when I feel like I've gotten small, is to trust the gold. It's to trust the inherent goodness of awareness and love. And it's really it points to what you were talking about, that no matter what the coverings look like, you know, what the shapes of the waves look like, there is a field of loving awareness that's what I am and you are and we all are. It's our
Mm-hmm.
source. And if we trust that, we can go to our deaths and we can experience losses, and we'll grieve like all humans grieve, but we'll be okay. And if
Mm-hmm.
we can trust that, we actually live from it more.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, you know, the Buddha talked about this in a different way. You know, this is one of the quotes that I really love, is, if it were not possible to free the heart from entanglement, I would not teach you to do so. And just because it's possible to free the heart, there are the teachings of the Dharma of liberation. So it's just like one of my favorite quotes. This wouldn't exist if it weren't possible, this pathway of freeing ourselves. And it's possible because we already are the love we long for. It's
Mm-hmm.
already the truth. The awareness that's listening right now is the same awareness in all of us, and it's here. And it's vast and it's formless and it's timeless. And there's trusting in that. What we're trusting in, and this is where hope comes in. We can only hope for really our potential to manifest who we are. That's what hope is, that we're hopeful that we can manifest that love and bring it fully out, that we can manifest that wisdom. Let me read you. I wrote a note to myself. I want to read you this. This is a Barbara Kingsolver. And she says this: here's what I've decided. The very least you can do in your life is figure out what you hope for. And the most you can do is live inside that hope, not admire it from a distance, but live right in it under its roof. What I want is so simple, I almost can't say it. Elementary kindness.
Mm-hmm.
So what it says is that hope has kind of two qualities. And one is that it's not about some abstract thing. It's really about the hope that we can manifest the potential that's here, right here. And the second quality is that we put energy towards that we live inside it. And it has the quality of heart. It's what we really care about. It's kindness.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, that's worthy of a pause to let that sink in. No, thank you. So, as we kind of move into taking some questions, thank you for everyone who's submitted a question. We'll get to as many of them as we can. So, the first question I have is from, is it Di? And the last name is Bly. I'm going to go ahead and read the question, but we'll let Tara, you can come on screen and answer it. Hi, Di. Why is it so hard in relation to climate emergency and the immense suffering already taking place to start a conversation in any Sangha about civil resistance or activism, especially given that our compassion, our refuge in the Dharma, is all about individual freedom from suffering? Did I read that correctly, Di? Is there anything you'd change about that?
Yes, I think you missed the key thing, which was, especially given that our compassion, our refuge in the Dharma, is, as here until Tara's last comment, all about freedom from individual suffering. And I just give a little bit of background. I've been fortunate in working with the work that reconnects, which is Joanna Macy's marvelous teaching.
Love it.
And I've also been blocking motorways with Insulate Britain throughout the autumn, and I'm imminently expecting prison sentences. And I sort of imagined, as there are 3-4 of us in the Dharma out of 150 activists, that we would be able to speak in Sanghas about the extension of compassion, particularly to the immense suffering that's already happening in the global south. And so far, we have either had no audience or we have had an embarrassed silence. So I live in a way that tries very hard. I try very hard to be compassionate and understanding about why this topic is so hard for people to think about.